I can still recall the day I enlisted in the Army like it was yesterday. Fresh out of college, I was eager to serve my country, full of energy and purpose. The structure of military life felt like it suited me perfectly, and over time, I found meaning in my duties. But with every deployment, I left more and more of my personal life behind. After nearly 30 years of service, I finally retired. Sandra and I had been through a lot, juggling the demands of raising our kids in the midst of the constant upheaval. I thought our bond was unshakable, but coming back to civilian life turned out to be more difficult than I anticipated. We started to grow apart, though the signs were so subtle at first that I didn't even notice. I'd gotten too comfortable in our routine. It was then that I realized trust can be a fragile thing. We lived in a quiet cul-de-sac, surrounded by modest houses. At our first neighborhood block party, Sandra and I, now empty nesters, met some of the folks living around us. Ethan, our son, was off at college, and Zalupa, our daughter, had just joined the Navy, which, as a retired Army colonel, didn't sit all that well with me. At the party, Sandra found herself cornered by Gary, the guy from across the street, and I could tell she wasn't enjoying the conversation. She shot me a look, silently begging for an escape, but I was caught up talking with Megan, a fit single mom who lived nearby. When Sandra's pleading look became more urgent, I finally brought Megan over to Gary to bail her out. Sandra wasn't too happy about how long I had taken, though. As we were leaving, we exchanged nods with the Olsons, a younger couple who gave each other an odd, almost secretive glance. My years in intelligence had trained me to notice things like that, but I brushed it off. I was more focused on hoping Sandra and I could reconnect later that night. Our marriage had taken a beating over the years, especially during my posting in Korea. At one point, we almost called it quits, but somehow we managed to patch things up. Still, I had this gut feeling that something had gone on during that rough period. Infidelity isn't exactly uncommon in military marriages, though nobody likes to admit it. We were lucky to still be together, but I couldn't shake the suspicion that Sandra had been unfaithful while I was overseas. How did I know? My ex-girlfriend, who worked at a hotel near Sandra's office, once tipped me off after spotting her at the Red Roof Inn, and it raised some serious doubts. I even hired a private investigator, but it turned out Sandra's hospital was under renovation, and she had been parking at the hotel out of necessity. Still, her early morning arrivals at work seemed to stop when I came home, which left me uncertain. That year I spent in Korea took a toll on our family. The distance created a gap between us that I couldn't quite bridge, and it hit me that our marriage wasn't as solid as I thought. I never found out who the other man might have been, but Sandra seemed dedicated to fixing things, and I was willing to try too. I even gave up my love of flying and transitioned to Army intelligence, a move that kept me out of harm's way and gave Sandra some peace of mind. Despite several deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan after September 11th, this new role was less dangerous, which helped her worry a little less. But I still had concerns about our relationship, so when it came time to decide whether to pursue the rank of general, I chose to retire. Another deployment could have been the final blow for us. After retirement, I landed a consulting gig that paid better than the Army and allowed me to be there for my kids' graduations, with Sandra by my side, which was worth more than any promotion. Sandra, meanwhile, kept advancing her career in nursing and eventually became the lead nurse on a brain surgery team. She worked closely with Dr. Dylan Sanchez, a skilled and confident surgeon. I couldn't help but notice the way he looked at her, and the way she constantly praised him didn't sit right with me. When I brought it up, Sandra admitted that flirting with Dylan helped her blow off steam, but she swore it was harmless. She even threw my working relationship with Fiona, a colleague from the CIA, in my face. Fiona had shown interest in me before I deployed to Iraq, and Sandra said she trusted me with her, so I should do the same. That conversation didn't end well and left a lingering tension between us. The truth is, Sandra had a reason to be suspicious. After an ambush in Iraq, Fiona made a move on me, and in a weak moment, I nearly went along with it. We got interrupted before anything happened, and I told myself that maybe it balanced things out for whatever Sandra might have done during my time in Korea. But deep down, I knew I was only lying to myself. Now, Sandra was about to head off to South America for 6 weeks with Doctors Without Borders. She'd be working with Dr. Dylan, and I wasn't exactly thrilled about that, but after all the sacrifices she'd made for my career, I didn't feel like I could object. "I've stayed home for you plenty of times," she reminded me. "Now it's your turn to wait for me." What could I say to that? Things were tense when she left for the airport. She spent the night before packing and talking to her mom, so we barely had any time together. I didn't want to stir things up, so I let it go. The next morning, she was gone. No goodbye, no note. I checked my phone for any messages, but there were none. I felt a mix of frustration and worry. After a cup of coffee, I tracked her flight to Colombia and figured she'd call or text me once she landed. But nothing came. I shot her a short message. Hope you're doing okay. Interesting way to leave, Sandra. Says a lot. No response. Not that day or the next. Usually, running helped me clear my mind, but the stress this time had me pushing myself harder than normal. I was nearly out of breath as I approached our cul-de-sac when Brian Olson, the guy who lived behind us, called out. His wife Natalie was out tending the garden, and he jokingly commented on the view, noticing where my eyes had wandered. I brushed it off, saying I needed a shower. Brian invited me over, even without Sandra around, for steaks and drinks. His wife gave me a strange smile, and the whole situation felt a bit off. I decided to take the long way home, still preoccupied with the fact that I hadn't heard from Sandra. After a shower, I sat alone in our empty house, waiting for a call that never came. By the time I finally picked up the phone to call Sandra's hotel, it was already late. I had her schedule memorized and knew her room number by heart, but when I tried calling, no one picked up. The hotel manager, a guy named Mateo Romero, confirmed she had checked in, but there was something about his tone. He was holding back. He promised he'd check on her and have her call me, but I wasn't buying it. Something didn't feel right. I scrolled through my contacts, landing on Rachel Price, one of Sandra's closest work friends. If anyone knew what was going on, it'd be Rachel. Just as I was about to call, my phone rang. It was Mateo again, not Sandra. Hello, Mateo, I answered. Any news about my wife? Senor, she's not in her room, he said, sounding a little too indifferent. Maybe she's out with some other ladies. His tone shifted. He was getting cagey. Mateo, do me a favor, would you? Si, senor, he answered, though I could tell he was losing patience. What's Dr. Dylan Sanchez's room number? Room 514, senor. Do you want me to call him? I cringed. Sandra's room was next door, 515. Not yet, Mateo. One more thing. Si, senor, but I'm very busy, he said, clearly wanting to get off the phone. Call Rachel Price's room for me, please. He hesitated, but after a pause, he agreed and put me on hold. When Rachel finally picked up, I could already sense she knew what this was about. Hi, Rachel, I said. Sorry to bother you. But do you know where Sandra is? She let out an annoyed sigh. Why are you asking me? Don't play dumb, Rachel. Sandra's room is right next to Dylan's, and she's not there. You know why. David, you should talk to your wife, she snapped back defensive. Then I heard a man's voice in the background, asking, Who is that? I can talk to your husband about the man in your room, Rachel. I've got his number. Her tone changed immediately. Please don't call him. This is the first time. I don't care how many times it's been, Rachel. Just tell me where my wife is, or I'll call him right now. Reluctantly, Rachel transferred me to Dylan's room. When he picked up, I could tell he thought it was Rachel calling back. Sorry to interrupt, Dylan, I said coldly. This is David Cole. I need to talk to my wife. He hesitated, trying to play dumb. Why are you asking me? Dylan, if you ever want to perform surgery again, put Sandra on the phone. There was some muffled noise before Sandra's voice finally came through. Give me the phone, Dylan, she said, annoyance clear in her tone. David, I didn't expect to have this conversation tonight, she said, her voice cool. What are you doing in his room, Sandra? And why didn't you answer any of my messages? David, what do you think I'm doing? She snapped. I was having a decent evening after a stressful day until you decided to start calling around. Just be honest with me. Are you and Dylan having an affair? She paused. Then I heard her telling Dylan to leave. After a long silence, she finally spoke. David, I've been a good wife, good mother. I'll be home in 6 weeks, and we can talk about it then. But right now, just let me have this. Just once. I was floored. You couldn't even talk to me before you left, Sandra? All that would have done is start a fight, she shot back, as if I was the one being unreasonable. Maybe, I said, sarcasm lacing my words. Maybe I would have asked you to stay. Maybe I would have stayed, she admitted, her voice softening for the first time. But I needed this, David. Just once to feel something. And Dylan? What's he? A part of the package deal? He's just a distraction, David. I don't love him. How convenient. I muttered, trying to swallow the rising anger. Just then, there was a knock at my door. "Sandra, I gotta go." "I love you, David," she said, but the words felt hollow. "I love you too, Sandra, but I'm not sure if I'm still in love with you," I said, hanging up. When I opened the door, Natalie was standing there, alone. "Evening, David," she greeted, smiling in a way that made me forget about Sandra for a moment. "Hello, Natalie," I replied, taking in how she looked, far too stunning for a simple visit. "You gonna let me in?" she asked, raising an eyebrow, her voice playful. I stepped aside. "Sure." She handed me a bottle of wine, red Moscato, my favorite. I guess Sandra had mentioned it to her. "I figured you could use some company," Natalie said as she started looking around for wine glasses like she'd done it before. "I'm not sure how much company I'll be, but I've got some questions." "Ask away," she said, finding the glasses effortlessly. As I poured, I asked, "Where's Brian?" "He's out playing cards with some friends," she answered almost dismissively. "Of course he is," I said, thinking of all the nights I left Sandra alone when I was away. "Sandra's in South America, right? Have you heard from her?" "Funny you mentioned that," Natalie said. "I was just talking to her when you knocked." "Oh, I'm sorry. Did I interrupt something?" "No, we said what we needed to say," I replied, wondering how much she already knew. Natalie looked at me, her eyes narrowing slightly. "David, I think we need to have a real conversation." We locked eyes, and I could tell we were both weighing the situation. "Let's sit," I suggested, motioning toward the living room. She sat down, crossing her legs, positioning herself just far enough to keep things polite. "How much has Sandra told you?" she asked, throwing the question right back at me. "I had hoped she talked to you before she left," I said. "Did she?" "No," Natalie admitted. "I've been trying to get a hold of her, only to find out she's in South America with that doctor she's been seeing. She told me to talk to you." I sighed. "Okay, let's stop dancing around it. What did you and Sandra plan before she left?" Natalie took a long sip of wine, gathering her thoughts. "Sandra and I ran into each other at the mall a while back. We ended up having drinks at my place. You and Brian were probably off doing your own things, and the conversation got personal. I opened up about my marriage and Brian's interests." She paused, and I waited. She seemed unsure how much to tell me. "Brian likes to share me," she finally said, her voice quieter. "Share you?" I asked, piecing it together slowly. "With other men?" "Yes," she confirmed, her tone steady. "I told Sandra because, well, I wanted her to know. So maybe she'd let me pursue you." "And how did she react to that?" "At first, she was shocked, but she listened, and eventually she agreed, as long as it happened while she was out of the country." I shook my head, almost laughing at how absurd it all was. "So Sandra never thought to clue me in?" "No," Natalie said, shaking her head. "She dropped that bombshell on me tonight, just as you were heading over." "I found out about her and Dr. Dillon tonight, too," I admitted. Natalie just shook her head, clearly stunned by the whole situation. "My husband and I have an open marriage, but we never sneak around behind each other's backs," Natalie said as if she were discussing something as ordinary as the weather. "So, Brian knows you're here?" I asked, trying to make sense of this absurd situation. "Yeah, he knows," she confirmed. "He's fully aware that I'm attracted to you and doesn't have a problem with it." I raised an eyebrow, still trying to process it. "And you've had other partners, right? Regular ones?" "Just one," she said nonchalantly. "It's been off and on for 2 years, but most of the time we find guys out of town for adventures." "And Brian just watches?" I asked, barely believing what I was hearing. "Yes," she answered, as though it were completely normal. "He says it's safer that way." I shook my head in disbelief. "How long have you two been living like this?" "For years," she said casually, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "And Sandra knew about all this?" I asked, trying to piece it all together. "She did," Natalie confirmed, "but only while she's away." "Did she tell you what she'd be doing while she's gone?" I pressed, searching for more answers. "No," Natalie admitted, her voice softening. "But I had a feeling she might be doing something similar. Maybe giving me the go-ahead to be with you was her way of easing her conscience. I just wish she'd talk to me," I said, the frustration building up inside me. Natalie handed me an envelope before I could say anything else. "Sandra left this for you," she said, heading toward the restroom. "She wanted you to read it before we did anything." I took the letter, hesitated for a moment, and then opened it. The envelope simply read, "David." I already knew it wasn't going to be easy to read. Dear David, by now, you figured out that I'm breaking our vows with Dylan. But before you start pointing fingers, remember Fiona in the Middle East. I may not have hard evidence, but I'm almost certain you slept with her. When I helped you study interrogation techniques for your Army intelligence classes, I learned to spot the signs, David. You're a terrible liar. I saw how you'd look away every time I brought her up. When Dylan touched me for the first time, I didn't tell you. Maybe I should have, just like I should have had an affair during those long, lonely years while you were off playing soldier. There were moments when I was tempted, especially when you were stationed in Korea, but I stayed faithful. Then Fiona visited me while you were in the Middle East, and her smug look all but confirmed my suspicions. I'm almost positive you betrayed me. If I'm wrong, then this is the first time I've broken our vows. But I doubt I'm wrong. Here's how it's going to go. While I'm gone, I'm not your wife, and you're not my husband. We both have a 6-week hall pass. When I return, if we still love each other, we'll figure out where we go from here. If not, we'll mourn what we had and move on. I'm making this choice, David, for me. I don't love Dylan, but I am attracted to him. He'll just be a fleeting memory if you still want me. You've heard the saying, if you love someone, set them free. I'll be back in 6 weeks. If you want to try again, meet me at the Ambassador Hotel near the airport. If not, don't come. Just walk away. Love always, Sandra. P.S. Natalie is supposed to have been tested for STDs before tonight. Make sure she shows you the results. Dylan and I were both tested before we left, and I'll get tested again before I return. If we're going to fix things, this is the first step toward trust. I sat there, stunned, holding Sandra's letter. Natalie, back from the bathroom, was standing at the kitchen island, refilling her wine glass like nothing in the world was wrong. Are you okay? She asked, her voice softer now. I will be, I replied, still trying to make sense of everything I'd just read. She nodded, poured me more wine, and sat back down, this time a lot closer than before. Her eyes, wide and searching, locked on mine. So, David, where do we go from here? She asked, the question hanging in the air between us. Right now? Nowhere, I said firmly. You and Sandra planned this for weeks, and I'm just finding out tonight. It sounds like she's been hiding things for a long time. Am I wrong? Natalie fidgeted, clearly caught off guard by my resistance. No, you're not wrong, she admitted, looking down at her wine glass. If I were single, maybe it'd be different, I said, my voice hardening. But I've loved Sandra for most of my life. I don't like being used, especially not like this. Natalie's eyes widened slightly as she realized her usual charm wasn't going to work. I understand how you feel, she said, her voice quieter now. So, nothing is going to happen between us? Not tonight, I replied, keeping my tone firm. I need time to think before I make any decisions. Will you at least join us for dinner in a day or two? She asked, still hopeful. I don't know, Natalie. I need to figure things out. We'll see. Okay, she said softly. Just know I'm here for you. Thanks, Natalie, I said, standing up, signaling that the conversation was over. Good night, and thanks for the wine. She took the hint and left, though I couldn't help but watch as she walked out. When she was gone, I sat back down, the weight of everything finally sinking in. I reread Sandra's letter. The second time around, things jumped out that I hadn't noticed before. There was venom in the way she wrote about Fiona, even though she had no real proof of anything. And yet, just a few paragraphs later, she practically gave me permission to sleep with Natalie. It didn't add up. Fiona and I got close during our time in the Middle East, sure, but we never crossed that line. There was one weak moment after an ambush, but it didn't go anywhere. It wasn't some premeditated affair like what Sandra was doing with Dylan, or what she'd arranged with Natalie. Back then, I felt guilty about even getting close to Fiona, but I also suspected Sandra had cheated during my time in Korea. I justified my actions as some twisted form of payback. Now I wondered, why didn't Sandra want me to meet her at the airport? Was she worried I'd get mad? I'd never given her a reason to think I'd get violent. And why a hotel instead of coming home? That's when it hit me. Was she really this manipulative? After setting all this up behind my back, the answer seemed obvious. I started feeling paranoid, my eyes darting around the room. Could there be a camera hidden somewhere? Maybe in the smoke alarm? I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. I needed to make some calls, but not inside the house. If there was surveillance, I wasn't about to make things easy for whoever was watching. I grabbed Sandra's itinerary and stepped outside to the porch, sitting on the swing chair. Sandra probably thought of me as just a regular consultant, but she had no idea about my real job. I was actually the senior security consultant for Acme Global, responsible for the safety of all our offices worldwide. I had access to resources she couldn't even imagine. My first call was to Connor Harris, the best tech specialist in my department. He picked up after one ring, his voice as efficient as ever. "Harris," he said. "Connor, it's David. How's everything?" I asked, cutting right to the chase. "Pretty good, boss," Connor replied. "But I doubt you're just calling to catch up." "No, I'm not," I admitted. "I need your expertise on something." I gave him the condensed version of everything going on, outlining my concerns. "Man, I'm really sorry to hear that, David." "I get it," Connor said, sounding sympathetic. "Give me about 45 minutes to grab my gear, and I'll be right over." "Thanks, Connor. I appreciate it," I said before hanging up. After that, I scrolled through my contacts, knowing I needed more help. I dialed another familiar number, waiting as it rang. "Hola, Senor David," came the bright, welcoming voice on the other end. "Santiago, my friend. How's life treating you?" I greeted warmly. Santiago Flores was my go-to guy in South America. He lived in Bogota, the same city where Sandra and Dylan were staying. I trusted him like family. "Doing well, boss. Didn't expect your call today." "What's up?" I gave him the rundown, much like I did with Connor. His tone shifted. "Damn, David. That's rough," he replied. "You need eyes and ears on the ground, right?" "That's right, Santiago," I confirmed. I provided him with the hotel details, room numbers, and the manager's name. "Can you handle it?" "Absolutely. Audio, video, and pictures." "Yeah, the whole package. And I'll need daily updates. Let me know if you need extra funds." "Got it. I'll get started right away." "Talk soon, boss." "Thanks, Santiago. I really appreciate it. Give my regards to your family." "Will do." "Stay strong, David." After I hung up, I emailed him Sandra's itinerary. It wasn't long before Connor showed up with his equipment, ready to get to work. Within 30 minutes, Connor uncovered hidden wireless cameras in several rooms. Most were tucked discreetly into smoke detectors, and he also found a few microphones. To make matters worse, our landline had been tapped. "These don't have much range," Connor pointed out as he examined the devices. "There's got to be a receiver nearby." Sure enough, after a little searching, we found a small box with a laptop hidden in the attic. It was locked, but Connor suspected it was collecting and uploading data from the cameras and microphones. "Looks like this gear belongs to Smith Investigations," Connor said, noting the conveniently labeled address and phone number on the equipment. "What do you want me to do with it?" "Shut it all down." I thought it over. "No, leave most of it. Just disable the camera and mic in my office. Let them keep watching. I'll make it boring for them." Connor smirked as he disabled the devices in my office. While he worked, he also checked the computer Sandra and I shared. He found spyware and a keylogger installed, things I never thought I'd have to worry about from my own wife. He removed all of it. "Why do you think she's doing this?" I asked, though the knot in my gut already told me the answer. "She's probably setting you up for something, my guess." "A divorce," Connor suggested, hitting the nail on the head. "Yeah, you're probably right," I muttered, the reality sinking in further. "One more thing," Connor added. "If this investigator installed all this, he might still have a key to the house. I'd change the locks and security codes if I were you." "Good call. I'll get a locksmith out here right away." "Thanks again, Connor." After Connor left, I didn't waste any time. I called a locksmith to get the locks changed and the security codes reset. The last thing I needed was someone letting themselves in while I was vulnerable. While I waited, I went back to the shared computer. Sandra hadn't bothered to update her email credentials, even after I suggested it. This time, I was glad she ignored me. Normally, I wouldn't invade her privacy like this. But this wasn't a normal situation. I started combing through her emails and quickly came across several exchanges with Dylan. I decided not to read through them immediately, so I exported them to a thumb drive for later. There were a few emails with our kids, but nothing out of the ordinary. The locksmith showed up soon after, and I walked him through the house, showing him which locks needed to be replaced. Then I returned to the computer. That's when an email thread between Sandra and Dylan caught my attention. The subject line read "lawyer." I clicked it open, and what I found hit me like a gut punch. Sandra had told Dylan that she'd met with her lawyer, reviewed the proposed divorce settlement, and was planning to move forward, despite her lawyer advising against it. Dylan seemed taken aback, questioning her decision since she'd previously claimed she still loved me and wanted to stay in our marriage. Sandra's response was ice cold. She said she intended to stay with me, but on her terms. She bragged about how I had unknowingly been a cuck for years. She laid out the entire plan. When she returned from South America, she would meet me at the Ambassador Hotel and serve me divorce papers. Then, she'd pressure me into signing a post-nuptial agreement. If I refused, she planned to use the evidence of my supposed affair with Natalie to ruin me financially. She even mentioned the possibility of suing Natalie for alienation of affection, further tightening the noose around my neck. Dylan seemed nervous about the risks, but Sandra was cocky, confident that she had everything in place. She even admitted to cheating on me for years, starting when I was stationed in Korea. She felt no remorse. She had it all figured out. I printed the entire thread, needing to keep it safe. By the time the locksmith finished up, I paid him, giving him an extra tip for coming out after hours. Then I shut down the computer. I needed to clear my head, so I left the house, grabbed a burger and a beer, and picked up some cigars on the way to calm my nerves. As I sat there, drinking my beer, the full weight of it all finally hit me. Sandra had been playing me for years. All the times I thought we were working through things, she was busy setting me up for this. She let me believe we could rebuild our marriage, all while she was preparing to tear it down. Now she thought she could corner me, force my hand, and take everything. But she underestimated me. I wasn't going down without a fight. I caught sight of a dark SUV trailing me in my rearview mirror, and it didn't take long to figure out who it was. Sandra's private investigator. He was sloppy, sticking to me even as I switched lanes and took detours. Annoyed, I pulled into Yancey's Bar and Grill, and sure enough, he followed, parking just a few spots away. Enough was enough. I got out of the car, walked straight to his SUV, and yanked the door open, startling him. His eyes widened as he scrambled to regain composure. "Who the hell are you? And why are you following me?" I growled, not in the mood for games. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, clearly not expecting me to confront him. "Cut the crap," I snapped. "You've been on my tail since I left the house." "What? Are you the PI my wife hired?" "I don't know what you mean," he replied, his voice shaky. "You're lying," I said coldly, leaning closer. "I've had enough of people lying to my face. Maybe I should give you a reason to stop." His eyes darted around, desperate. "Please don't hit me. I'll leave, I swear. Good? And don't let me catch you anywhere near me again." "Got it. I got it." "I'm sorry," he mumbled, face pale, before speeding off like his life depended on it. I stood there, watching him go, shaking my head. Coward. Once he was gone, I walked into the bar, ordered a burger and a beer, and found a seat at the counter. The bartender took one look at me and asked, "Woman trouble?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah, you could say that. Can't live with him. Can't shoot him," he joked, managing to pull a guile out of me. I finished my meal, grabbed a beer from the fridge when I got home, and headed outside to clear my head. I lit a cigar and sat there, the smoke curling up into the night air. As I took slow, steady puffs, my mind started working. I wasn't going to let Sandra destroy me without a fight. A plan began to take shape, something that could turn the tables. I pulled out my phone, searched the web for details, checked my calendar, and picked a date. I need to make some calls to put things in motion. Just as I was about to make the first call, my phone buzzed with a message from Santiago. All set. First update in the morning. Please send $250 for expenses. I immediately sent the money via PayPal and replied, "Thanks. Talk tomorrow." After I finished my cigar, I went upstairs. Something nagged at me, and I found myself opening Sandra's nightstand drawer. Her rings were there, neatly placed. For a moment, I just stared at them. Then, I took off my own wedding ring and set it down beside hers. Without hesitation, I looked up at the hidden camera in the smoke detector and flipped it off. Let them watch. I was done playing along. The next morning, I checked Sandra's email. A new message caught my eye. "Been made." The email detailed how I'd found the surveillance gear and scared off the investigator. I smirked, marked it unread, and logged out. Let her think she's still in control. After work, I sat down to review the footage Santiago had sent over. The images weren't high quality, but they told me enough. Sandra and Dylan looked comfortable, too comfortable. But it wasn't just the footage that bothered me. It was what Sandra said, her voice cold and calculating. "He's probably with that girl next door. I'll have video of it tomorrow for my lawyer. I slammed my laptop shut, disgusted. She was already setting me up. I called Santiago, ready to push forward. Senior David, thanks for the money. Did you see the footage? Yeah, I did. Listen, I've got a plan. I explained my idea, step by step. Santiago didn't hesitate, agreeing that it could be pulled off. Why 10 days? He asked. That's our 25th wedding anniversary, I said, a bitter smile tugging at my lips. I want to make sure she never forgets it. Santiago Gary led, his voice filled with admiration. You're one tough hombre, Senor David. After ending the call, I scrolled through my contacts until I found Fiona's number. We hadn't spoken since the Middle East, but something told me this was the right time. I dialed, not expecting much, but to my surprise, she answered. David Cole. Long time no hear, she said, her voice immediately bringing back memories I tried to bury. Yeah, it's been a while. I didn't waste time diving into the mess I was in. She listened intently, and when I read her Sandra's letter, her response was sharp. That lying snake, Fiona hissed. I never said any of that. We were just partners, nothing more. Thanks, Fiona. I regret what happened between us, but what Sandra's doing now, none of it makes sense. David, you don't owe me any apologies. We were in the middle of hell, and we did what we had to do. I don't regret any of it. Her tone softened for a moment. So, what's your next move? I outlined my plan, expecting her to be cautious. Instead, she surprised me. I like it. I really like it. I've got contacts who can help with the parts you can't handle from here. When do you want this done? She asked. In 10 days, I said, savoring the thought. It'll be our 25th anniversary. Oh, David, you're wicked, she laughed, amused. Consider it my anniversary gift to you. We both laughed, but then her tone shifted. You know, David, I've thought about you a lot since the war. I've thought about you too, I admitted. We made a hell of a team. No one's ever come close to that. She hesitated, then added, I haven't connected with anyone like that since either. I'm pushing papers now. Retirement's been on my mind. If you do retire, I've got a place for you, I offered. With a certain retired Army colonel, she teased, the spark returning to her voice. Absolutely, I said with a grin. That's something to look forward to, she said, but then, with a more serious tone, asked, David, do you think we could really reconnect? Yes, I answered, without any doubt. Sandra's made her choices. I'm not going back. Good, she said, sounding relieved. Because I'd like to finish what we started. I'd like that too, I replied. But I've got a few things to take care of first. Just don't make me wait too long. I won't, I promised. But this divorce, it's going to take time. I understand, she said, her voice gentle. Just remember, I'm here if you need me. It's been great hearing your voice again, I told her, meaning it. Yours too, she replied warmly. But my dinner's getting cold. Don't be a stranger, okay? I won't. Promise. You'd better, she teased before hanging up. When I put the phone down, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Fiona still cared, and in this mess, that meant everything. But my thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the back door. I turned to see Natalie standing there, holding a plate of lasagna. I thought you might be hungry, Natalie said, her voice soft as she stood in the doorway, holding a plate of lasagna. Mind if I come in? Sure, just put it on the counter, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. She smiled, walked in, and set the plate down with deliberate care. I hope you like it. Or maybe you'd prefer something else? Her tone was suggestive, and her eyes lingered on mine. I felt the pull, the temptation to forget everything in the warmth of her presence. But my conversation with Fiona had reminded me of what really mattered. I wasn't going to throw everything away for a fleeting moment. As tempting as that sounds, I'll have to pass, I said firmly, resisting the urge to take her up on the offer. Her expression shifted to concern. What's wrong? Sandra gave you a hall pass, didn't she? I do find you attractive, I admitted, but Sandra's got a camera right there. I pointed at the smoke detector overhead. Why don't you wave hello? Natalie's face drained of color as she looked up at the smoke detector. Are you serious? Dead serious, I replied. She's got cameras all over the house. Oh, and she hired a PI. He's probably watching too. Maybe keeping tabs on both of us. She looked genuinely rattled. I had no idea. Come to my office, I said, wanting to show her the full extent of the mess we were both tangled in. Once inside, I handed her the printout of Sandra's emails with Dylan. As she read through them, her face turned pale with shock. "Oh my God, David, I didn't know. I swear I had no idea." "I believe you," I said, seeing her sincerity. "Sandra played us both." "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm filing for divorce," I said simply. "And I won't be with anyone until it's done." "Can we still be friends?" she asked, her voice tinged with hope. "Of course," I said, managing a small smile. "But that's it." "Okay, David," she sighed, looking down. "I'm sorry about everything. I hope you like the lasagna." "Thanks, Natalie," I replied, walking her to the door. She looked good, really good, in those shorts, and part of me wanted to take things further, but I knew better. I wasn't about to risk everything for a moment of weakness. After she left, I changed into my running gear, figuring the lasagna would still be warm when I got back. A long run always cleared my head, and tonight I needed that more than ever. When I returned, showered, and sat down to eat, the lasagna hit the spot. Cheese, mushrooms, and meat, just the way I liked it. After cleaning up, I grabbed a beer and headed to my office. Before sitting down, I shot a glance at the camera in the front room and couldn't resist flipping it off. Let Sandra and her PI watch if they wanted to. I was done caring. First, I checked Sandra's email. There was a response to the investigator, telling him to ease off for now. Nothing else of note. Then, I dug into her finances. We had 3 accounts. One for her, one for me, and a shared household account. She'd saved up a decent amount, but had also spent a hefty chunk on a retainer for an attorney, Laura Spencer, and a significant payment to Smith Investigations. Victoria's secret charges caught my eye, too. They weren't for anything I'd ever seen her wear. Interesting. Curious about Spencer, I did a quick search and found out she was a family law attorney known for her unconventional views. She'd written a controversial book promoting female-led marriages, and she was a vocal advocate of the hot wife and cuckold lifestyle. Her reputation was polarizing. Either people loved her or despised her. I bought the cheapest Kindle version of her book, grabbed another beer, and sat outside with a cigar to skim through it. The content was as bad as I expected. Psychobabble with an underlying bitterness toward men. The fact that Sandra had chosen her as an attorney, it told me everything I needed to know. My phone buzzed, pulling me away from the nonsense. It was a text from Santiago. "I can arrange what you need, but it'll cost $1,000. Without hesitation, I transferred the money from Sandra's account, making sure the trail would lead back to her. Then, I messaged Santiago to confirm the transfer was done. The days that followed blurred together into a routine. I checked Santiago's updates, monitored Sandra's email, went to work, went running, and unwound each night with a beer, a cigar, and the quiet of my own thoughts. I didn't care that Sandra never called or texted. In fact, the silence was welcome. Whatever love I once had for her had evaporated. I saw Natalie only once after that, when I returned the plate. Vince invited me to dinner, but I turned him down, claiming I had things to take care of. He seemed disappointed, but I was relieved Natalie kept her distance. I didn't need that complication right now. The highlight of my days was talking to Fiona. Our conversations flowed easily, like they always had. We talked about life, the past, and even my kids. The more we spoke, the closer I felt to her. I realized I was falling for her again, hard. Eventually, I decided to schedule a meeting with Laura Spencer. I needed to see this woman face to face. When I arrived at her office, her receptionist greeted me with a polite smile and offered me coffee. Moments later, I was shaking hands with Spencer herself. She was around my age, sharp and well-dressed. I noticed the ring on her finger and wondered what kind of arrangement she had with her husband. "So, you're considering a divorce?" she asked, taking a seat behind her desk. "Yes, I am," I said, sitting across from her. "And your name is Cole?" she confirmed, glancing at her computer screen. "That's right." She frowned slightly. "What's your wife's name?" "Sandra, short for Marcia." "Well, Mr. Cole, I can't represent you due to a conflict of interest," she said, her tone cool and professional. "I'm already representing your wife." "I figured as much," I said with a shrug. "I also know you only represent women." "That's a bit sexist, don't you think?" She didn't flinch. "If you knew that, why did you come to see me?" I leaned forward, my eyes locked on hers. As a retired Army intelligence officer, I like to know who my enemies are. "Enemies?" She raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Is that how you see me?" Pretty much, I replied, my voice steady. I read your book and saw your interview in the New York Times. You recruit your clients into your lifestyle, right? Is that what you did with my wife? That's privileged information, she said, her tone turning icy. Of course, I replied, unfazed. Did you know Sandra was going to Colombia? Did she tell you what she planned to do there? Her eyes flickered, just for a second, but her answer came smooth as ever. That's also privileged information. I leaned back, a small smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. Of course. Again, that's privileged information, Laura said, her voice sharp, trying to shut down the conversation. I nodded slowly, watching her closely. I noticed you're married. Your book's chapter on controlling husbands was enlightening. Do you treat your own husband the way you suggest? Humiliating him? Controlling him? Her eyes flashed with irritation. That's none of your concern, Mr. Cole. This meeting is over. I stood up with a smirk, taking my time. I'd like to say it was a pleasure meeting you, Mrs. Spencer, but that would be a lie. We'll likely cross paths again. Have a good day. As I turned to walk out, I paused at the door, my voice low but cutting. By the way, I found your book disgusting. I caught the faintest twitch of her jaw as I left the office, and as I passed the receptionist, I noticed her smiling subtly, probably having overheard my parting words. The day I'd been waiting for, our 25th wedding anniversary, had finally arrived. I had taken the day off work, knowing it was going to be eventful. Early that morning, I received a text from Fiona. All set. Everything is in place. Later, another message came through from Santiago. Check your email. I opened the video he sent, the footage grainy but clear enough. It showed a dirt road, the kind you'd expect to see somewhere far removed from civilization. A makeshift checkpoint was set up, armed soldiers standing by. 3 SUVs approached, slowing as the soldiers flagged them down. They searched each vehicle, but when they hit Dylan and Sandra's SUV, things escalated. More soldiers arrived, and soon, Dylan and Sandra were pulled from the car, handcuffed, and hauled away. The SUV was towed, and the other vehicles were eventually waved through. I watched in stunned silence for a moment before calling Santiago. I saw the video. Santiago. What the hell happened? We planted the stuff like we discussed, Santiago explained, his tone calm. Just a small amount to get attention. But it turns out Dylan was smuggling a lot more than we thought. Pills, mostly. Pills? Dylan was trafficking drugs? The words felt heavy in my mouth, and yet, strangely, I wasn't surprised. Yeah, white powder and flea powder. My men saw the pills being loaded, and they backed off to avoid getting tangled up with any cartel. Smart move, I think. Very smart. I muttered. Where are Sandra and Dylan now? They're both in jail, Santiago replied matter-of-factly. It looks like Sandra might have known more than we thought. They have 48 hours to present the case to a judge, but with the amount Dylan was moving, it's likely they'll hold them for a while. And the consulate? They should know by now, Santiago said confidently. I'll keep you posted. Thanks, Santiago. It's not the outcome I was expecting, but if Sandra's involved in trafficking, she deserves whatever she gets. After ending the call, I immediately reached out to Fiona. I explained the situation, and as usual, she wasn't shocked. She offered to pull some strings and get more details through her contacts in Colombia. I'll let you know as soon as I hear something, she said, her voice steady as always. While I waited to hear back, I grabbed a trash bag and began removing all the surveillance equipment Sandra had secretly installed. I wasn't interested in being watched anymore. I pulled out the cameras and microphones from every room, making sure I got them all, then headed to the attic to retrieve the receiver and laptop. I tossed everything into the trash bag, dragged it out to the driveway, and left it there for her PI to collect, if he had the guts to show up. I picked up the phone and called Smith Investigations. Smith Investigations, a woman answered, her tone professional but uncertain. I want to speak to your boss, I said flatly. Yes, sir. One moment, she stammered, clearly sensing the weight of my words. Moments later, I recognized the voice on the other end. It was the same man I confronted at Yancey's. Michael Smith, how can I help you? This is David Cole. You remember me? There was a pause. Yes, sir, he replied, his voice tense. Your client is currently sitting in a Colombian jail on drug trafficking charges. I've removed all your surveillance gear from my house. It's sitting in a trash bag on my driveway. If it's still there by tomorrow, it's going in the garbage. Yes, sir, he said quickly, the fear clear in his tone. I didn't wait for a response. I hung up, satisfied that he wouldn't cause any more trouble. The next morning, the bag was gone. I didn't care whether Smith himself picked it up or sent someone else. It was out of my life, and that's all that mattered. Later that day, Fiona called. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. I just spoke with the station chief in Bogota. What did you find out? I asked, preparing for the worst. Colombian authorities have been watching Dylan since he arrived. Turns out he's connected to a major cartel. If Sandra's involved, this could get serious. The judge handling their case has a reputation for being harsh on foreigners. I sighed. How much time are we talking about? Minimum of 10 years, Fiona said. Good. I replied, my voice hard. If she's guilty, that's exactly what she deserves. How much did they get caught with? I asked, trying to wrap my head around the enormity of it all. About 20 pounds of white powder and flea powder. They're in deep. Damn, I muttered. That's a lot. There's a good chance the State Department will be reaching out soon. Be prepared. I will. I assured her. Keep me posted on anything else you hear. After hanging up, I felt the weight of it all settle in. This was bigger than I had imagined. I decided to call the hotel in Bogota next. When Mateo answered, I asked to be connected to Rachel Price's room. Rachel's voice came through, sounding shaky and uncertain. Hello. Rachel, it's David Cole. Do you know where Sandra is? It's our anniversary, and I've been trying to reach her. Is she with Dylan? There was a long, tense pause before Rachel finally answered, her voice trembling. No, David, she's not. Sandra and Dylan were arrested at a checkpoint for drug trafficking. The soldiers took them away. We've been questioned and told to stay at the hotel. It's like we're under house arrest. I let the silence linger, letting the gravity of her words sink in. Have you told Mark yet? I asked, my tone sharp and pointed. No, I haven't, she admitted, barely above a whisper. Rachel, I'm going to talk to him. I said, my voice cold and unwavering. Please, David, don't tell him. It'll destroy him, she begged, her voice cracking with desperation. Not as much as your cheating will. I replied coldly, my voice sharp as a blade. He deserves to know. I ended the call without giving Rachel a chance to respond. She had made her choices, and Mark deserved the truth. Without hesitation, I dialed his number, giving him all the details and offering to send him video evidence of Rachel's affair. Thanks for telling me, David, Mark said, his voice heavy. This will be the last time she cheats on me. I sent him the videos right away, knowing it wasn't easy for him to see, but necessary. Then I turned my focus to my own situation, calling a divorce lawyer and setting up an appointment for 3 days later. A couple of days passed in a blur. I was focused on gathering evidence, preparing myself mentally for the divorce, when my supervisor, Robert Pierce, called me into his office. The moment I stepped in, I saw a man from the State Department sitting there, looking serious. David, this is Adam Reed from the State Department, Robert said gravely. He's here about your wife. Adam cleared his throat. David, your wife Marcia has been arrested in Colombia for pill trafficking. We can monitor her case, but won't interfere with local laws. She's also been placed on a no-fly list, so even if she's released, she won't be able to return to the U.S. How much prison time is she facing? I asked, my voice calm but hollow. Up to 12 years, Adam replied. After 7 or 8 years, she might be eligible for conditional release, but she won't be able to leave Colombia. He handed me a pamphlet on how to send her money for legal fees and other expenses. He even offered to help arrange visitation if I wanted. I'll consider it and be in touch, I said curtly, taking the pamphlet without looking at it. After Adam left, Robert closed the door and gave me a long, hard look. David, this could affect your security clearance and your job, he warned. Take some time off and get everything under control. I will, Robert. Thanks. Back home, I dove back into Sandra's emails, looking for any thread that might explain her decisions. It didn't take long to find something suspicious. 3 months before their trip, Dylan had sent Sandra an email asking if she wanted to make extra money in Colombia. Sandra hesitated at first, but eventually agreed to his plan. Good girl, Dylan had replied. Trust me, you'll be glad you did. I printed out the entire exchange, saved it as a PDF, and added it to the growing collection of incriminating evidence on my thumb drive. Then I turned to the video footage, fast-forwarding through the physical parts one didn't need to see. It wasn't until the day before their arrest that I hit gold. Are you ready? Tomorrow's the big day, Dylan asked. I think so, Sandra replied, her voice nervous, almost unsure. Good. The product will be in our vehicle tomorrow morning, packed in boxes labeled as medicine. We won't have to touch it. And you're sure we won't get caught? Sandra asked, her fear palpable. I've been on that road plenty of times. No checkpoints. If this works, we can do it again and retire with the money. Sounds good to me, she had said. Bingo. I saved the video, noting the timestamp, and added it to the thumb drive. My mind raced with plans. I wasn't done yet. I emailed the kids, arranging a Skype call for the next evening. Then I called Santiago to update him. Damn, Santiago said, letting out a low whistle. What's your plan now? I'm going through the rest of the evidence, I replied. I have a lawyer appointment tomorrow, and I plan to deliver the divorce papers myself. You're coming down here? He asked. Yes, and I'll hand the evidence over to the prosecutor while I'm there. You can stay with me and my family, Santiago offered warmly. Maria's cooking is always ready for you. Thanks, Santiago. I'm looking forward to it, I said, the thought of good food and real friends bringing a small smile to my face. We laughed and made plans for my arrival. After the call, I drained Sandra's personal account, sending the money through Western Union to cover her legal fees. I wasn't doing it out of love. I just didn't want her using any shared funds. Then, I grabbed trash bags and packed up all of her belongings, including our wedding album, and stuffed them in her car. I called her parents next, informing them about the divorce and Sandra's legal troubles. They were heartbroken, but what shocked them most was the news about her being involved in trafficking. Are you sure, David? Her father asked, disbelief in his voice. I have evidence, I said firmly. I'm turning it over to the prosecutor. Later that evening, they arrived to pick up her car and belongings. They looked defeated, saddened by the mess their daughter had created. Her mother hugged me before leaving. Please stay in touch, David, she whispered, tears in her eyes. I will. I promised, though I wasn't sure how much I could handle seeing them again. After they left, exhaustion washed over me. I grabbed a beer and a cigar, sitting on the porch, letting the smoke and quiet night calm my mind. It was then that Fiona called to check in. Hey, how are you holding up? She asked, her voice soft, knowing how heavy everything had become. I've been better, I admitted, but hearing your voice lifts my spirits. We talked for a while, and I shared my latest idea with her. She paused for a moment, thinking it over. That's the best idea I've heard in a long time, she said finally, her voice filled with excitement. Let's do it. We ended the call on a high note, and for the first time in days, I felt like things were falling into place. The next day, I met with my attorney, Emma Rogers. She was sharp and professional, a stark contrast to Sandra's lawyer, and she wasted no time going over the details. I'll take care of this, she said confidently after I provided her with all the evidence. With the charges Sandra's facing in Colombia, this will be easier than expected. What do you want out of this? She asked, getting straight to the point. Everything except her 401k, clothes, and her car. I've already sent most of her money for her legal expenses. That's doable, she replied, making notes. How do you plan to serve her? I'll deliver the papers myself, I said, my voice steady. I wanted her to see me, to know that I was the one ending it. Emma nodded. Okay, I'll have everything ready in 2 days. We discussed the idea of going after Dylan or even her lawyer, but Emma advised against it, noting that such cases rarely succeeded. I agreed and left after paying the retainer. That evening, I Skyped with the kids. They could tell something was off the moment we started talking. What's up, Dad? Ethan asked, his eyes narrowing with concern. I have some news, I began, taking a deep breath. Your mother and I are getting divorced. Both of them were stunned. Why? Ethan asked, his voice almost accusatory. Did you do something? I gave them a brief explanation, keeping it as factual as I could. I told them their mother was in a Colombian jail for pill trafficking. Are you sure she's involved? Zalupa asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and sadness. I have evidence, I said quietly. I'm giving it to the prosecutor. Ethan stared at me, his face hardening. You're helping put her in prison? She broke the law, son, I said firmly. I can't ignore that. We've talked about the dangers of pills before. I know, Ethan said quietly, the weight of it all in his voice. It's just so messed up. It is, son. But your mom made her choices, and now she has to deal with the consequences. It was hard, but I kept my voice steady, doing my best to be the rock they needed. We talked a bit longer as I answered their questions, explaining everything as clearly as I could. By the end of it, They understood, though it didn't make it any easier. We said our tearful goodbyes, and I promised to send them the address where they could write to their mother. It wasn't the kind of closure they deserved, but it was the only one I could offer. After the call, I phoned Tom to finalize the visitation plan for after I served Sandra the divorce papers. He confirmed the arrangement, and we hung up. I then updated Santiago on the situation. Do you know who's prosecuting the case? I asked. This Andres Ruiz. He's tough. Good, I replied. I'll bring him some evidence when I arrive. Our call ended, and the last one I made that day was to Fiona. She listened quietly as always, absorbing everything I said. By the time we finished, I felt lighter, more grounded, knowing she had my back. 2 days later, Emma called to tell me the divorce papers were ready for Sandra's signature. I packed my bags, grabbed my passport, and picked up the papers from her office. After notifying Santiago that I was en route, I headed to the airport. As I boarded, I received a confirmation from Tom that the visitation setup was finalized for the following day. Santiago met me after I cleared customs. We grabbed my luggage and headed out into the crowded streets of Bogotá. Where to first? He asked, glancing at me as he navigated the busy traffic. To see Senor Ruiz, I replied. The sooner I handed over the evidence, the better. At the government building, Santiago parked, and I made my way inside. The receptionist started to stop me, but before she could say much, a sharply dressed man appeared from down the hall. I'm Senor Ruiz, he said, his eyes sizing me up. And you are? David Cole. I replied, shaking his hand. I believe you're handling the case against my wife, Sandra. He nodded and gestured for me to follow him into his office. After offering me a seat, he cut straight to the point. What do you have for me? I handed him the thumb drive. This contains video footage of her and Dylan discussing their drug operation, as well as email exchanges outlining their plans. I've also included her email credentials in case you want to dig deeper. Ruiz didn't react immediately. Instead, he studied me, as if weighing what kind of man I was. You know, it's my job to make sure she's locked up for a long time, right? Yes, I understand that, I said firmly. Then why are you giving me this evidence? Shouldn't you be trying to help her defense? I paused for a moment, but Ruiz's sharp gaze didn't waver. Ah, he said, his voice softening just slightly. She was having an affair with Dr. Cardoso, wasn't she? Yes, I admitted, feeling the bitter truth settle in the room between us. Ruiz's expression barely shifted, but I could see the wheels turning in his mind. So, this is revenge, he asked. No, I replied, keeping my voice calm and measured. I'm a retired Army intelligence officer. I can't turn a blind eye to the law, even if it's my soon-to-be ex-wife. I'm also here to serve her divorce papers. The evidence is yours to use as you see fit. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with my response. All right, Senor Cole. I'll review what you've given me. How long will you be in Bogotá? Just a day or two, I replied. Long enough to serve her the papers and head back to the States. Very well. Welcome to Bogotá, Ruiz said as we shook hands. Back in the car, Santiago glanced over. How did it go? You were right, I said with a small smile. Ruiz is tough. Santiago, Gary led. You have no idea. Let's head home. Maria's been cooking all day. At his house, I was welcomed with open arms. Maria's warmth and hospitality, along with the playful chatter of their children, made the weight of everything I was dealing with feel, for just a moment, a little lighter. We enjoyed a home-cooked meal, and later, Santiago and I sat on the porch, cigars in hand, sipping a Guardian, a drink as strong as the fire in my belly. We laughed, reminisced about old times, and talked long into the night before turning in. The next morning, Santiago drove me to the prison. The place was as grim as I had imagined, crowded, loud, and reeking of neglect. Inside, we were led to a small, dimly lit room. There, waiting at a metal table, was Sandra. Shackled to the table, she looked nothing like the woman I once knew. Gaunt, exhausted, and broken. I sat across from her, my briefcase in hand. I opened it slowly, deliberately, and set the divorce papers in front of her on the cold steel table. You once gave me a choice, Sandra. I began, my voice calm, but filled with the finality of a door closing. You said I could take you back or walk away. Well, you know what I chose. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, I'm sorry, David. I never meant to hurt you. Nonsense. I replied, my voice cutting through her words like a blade. You plotted with Natalie, you conspired with Laura Spencer, and you tried to ruin me. You lied about everything. I'm here for one reason. Sign these papers, and we're done. But I don't want a divorce, she protested, her voice barely above a whisper, laced with desperation. It's too late for that, I said flatly. You plan to enslave me financially or destroy me, but it's over now. We're finished. Sign the papers. Sandra's hands shook as she picked up the pen, tears streaming down her face as she signed her name in the designated spots. An embassy official stood by, witnessing our signatures as Sandra's tears fell onto the papers. When it was done, I calmly gathered the documents and placed them back into my briefcase. By the way, I said, standing up, I noticed you paid in full for the Ambassador Hotel. Since you won't be needing it, I'll take advantage of the reservation. Go ahead, she muttered bitterly, her gaze lowered, defeated. And just so you know, I continued, my tone sharp as ever, I'm planning to invite Fiona. We'll finish what we started in the Middle East, just once if you don't mind. Her head snapped up, her eyes burning with anger and resentment. But I didn't flinch. I shook my head slowly, tired of the games, tired of the lies. After everything you've done, Sandra, don't even start, I said coldly, turning my back on her and walking out of the room. The door closed behind me with a heavy click, sealing off the past. Whatever this chapter had been, it was finally over, and I wasn't looking back. As far as I'm concerned, we're no longer married. Enjoy the life you chose, I said, standing up and leaving Sandra sobbing at the table. There was nothing left to say. She had made her choices, and now she would live with them. I walked out without looking back. Outside, I spotted Ruiz by his car. As I approached, he shook hands with the embassy official and then turned to me. If you don't mind, I'd like a private word with Colonel Cole, Ruiz said. The embassy man nodded and left us alone. Ruiz put a hand on my shoulder, steering me gently as we began to walk. Walk with me, Colonel. Please call me David. I'm not a colonel anymore, I replied, feeling the weight of those words more than I expected. Ruiz smiled knowingly. Once a military officer, always a military officer, and you may call me Andres. He paused for a moment before continuing. Santiago speaks highly of you. He's told me a lot about your time together. You know Santiago? I asked, surprised at the connection. Yes, we served in the army together before I became a prosecutor, and he joined Acme Global. He stopped, turning to face me, his expression more serious. I've reviewed the evidence you provided. It's solid. It'll save my government a lot of time and resources, which is why I've decided not to press charges against you for criminal conspiracy. I blinked, taken aback. Charges? Ruiz nodded. If things had gone differently, you could have been implicated in this entire mess. But Santiago made sure no illegal transactions took place. The money you sent? It ended up with a charity for widows and orphans. They're very grateful. I couldn't help but let out a small, relieved laugh. That's unexpected. Your cooperation and clean record saved you. But understand this. If you ever pull something like this again, I won't hesitate to act, Ruiz warned, his eyes narrowing. I understand. And thank you, Andres, for everything. No, thank you. The information you gave me will help ensure that justice is served for your wife and Dr. Cardoso. I'm heading back to the States, I said, feeling the finality of this chapter settling in. Ruiz extended his hand. If you ever find yourself back in Bogota, we should have dinner. I'd like that, I replied, shaking his hand firmly. Vaya con Dios, David. Vaya con Dios, Andres. I walked back to Santiago's car, where he was waiting, leaning casually against the hood. Everything go okay? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Yeah, all good, I said with a nod, but I need to get to the airport. As we drove, Santiago glanced over at me, his face serious for a moment. I'm sorry I didn't follow your orders exactly. Don't be, I said, shaking my head. You did the right thing. I'm the one who should apologize for putting you in that position. Santiago, Gary led softly. If it were me, I'd probably have done something worse. I smiled. It all worked out. It did. And hey, if you ever need a break, you know where to find us. Maria'll have bandeja paisa ready for you. I laughed as we shook hands. Thanks for everything, Santiago. Give my best to Maria and the kids. You got it, boss. Take care of yourself. Fiona met me at the Ambassador Hotel on the very day I was supposed to meet Sandra. But instead of facing the wreckage of my past, I found myself starting something new. We spent the night together, finally closing the door on what we had left unfinished in the Middle East all those years ago. It was a night I wouldn't forget. As we lay in bed afterward, Fiona nestled against me, her voice soft but confident. I put in my retirement papers, thinking about starting a new career. I turned to look at her, curious. Oh, and what might that be? She smiled playfully. Becoming a full-time wife and homemaker. Do you think there's an opening? I laughed, shaking my head. I think there might be a position opening up. Interested? She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. I already applied. I smiled, looking into her eyes. You know something, Fiona? I've fallen in love with you. Her expression softened as she kissed me gently. I've fallen in love with you too, David. There was a brief pause before she asked, so, are we going to make this official? Why not? I said, realizing how right it felt. Will you marry me? She kissed me deeply, her answer as clear as the joy in her eyes. Yes, David. I love you. Of course, I'll marry you. Months later, Sandra and Dylan were convicted of pill trafficking and sentenced to 12 years in a Colombian prison, along with steep fines. Dylan didn't last long. The prison he ended up in was a hellhole, and it wasn't long before rival cartel members got to him. Sandra, on the other hand, managed to survive in a women's prison, though her life was anything but easy. She received few visitors, mostly from the embassy. The kids wrote to her now and then, but they struggled with the idea of reconnecting after everything that had happened. Rachel and the others were released after the trial, but Rachel's life fell apart quickly. Her marriage ended in a bitter divorce, and she lost her job. I lost touch with Natalie and Vince. Rumor had it they continued their lifestyle, but Natalie had to take a break after getting pregnant. Paternity unknown, of course. As for me, my life had finally moved forward. After Fiona and I married, we sold my old house and bought a new one that was filled with peace and promise rather than old memories. Fiona settled comfortably into her new role as a homemaker, something that brought her joy and purpose. I offered her a position at Acme Global, but she declined, preferring to focus on creating a warm and happy home for us and her cat, which had quickly become the center of our little family. It was a simple life, but it was everything I needed, and for the first time in years, I was content. I had no regrets. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. New cheating wife stories tomorrow.